sorry? There is. It's outside on the reception desk. Okay, we're going to begin. So today, in our series, continuing our series of Sheva Neviot, we are going to explore the Nevi'ah Chuldah, who is probably the least well-known of the seven. And for those who are concerned that we might not have what to say, buckle up, because there's quite a bit of very, very fascinating information. Okay, it begins very mildly. We've seen in this Gemara that states that there are Sheva Neviot, that the pattern is we have Sheva Neviot Man Ninhu. Who are they? List of the seven. Chuldah is second to the last, so we already know. Some of the Neviot, it's written straight out. And then the Gemara goes on to say, well, how do we know that these are the seven Neviot whose prophecy is recorded for generations? Meaning there may have been other women in Klal Yisrael at various times who prophesied, but they prophesied about the weather, about family matters, things that didn't need to be recorded for posterity. These are the seven whose words are recorded for posterity, meaning that there has to be something in their nivuot, in their prophecies, that is still relevant today. This is nivuah shehutzricha ledorot. The ones that are necessary for generations, those are the ones who are recorded. Those are the ones we're looking at. So we've seen that some of them are identified as a Nevi'ah straight out in the Pasuk, and others it's much more subtle. So we saw last week with Abigail a very, very subtle reference to her being a Nevi'ah. Chuldah is the opposite, couldn't get more clear. Chuldah, dichtiv, it's written straight out in the text, in which you have below in source number 2, Melachim Bet, Perek Chav Bet, Pasuk Yud Daled, so smack in the middle of the section that you have. Vayelech Chilkiah HaKohen, Va'achikam, Va'achbor, V'shafan, Va'asaya, El Chuldah HaNevi'ah. She's called straight out Chuldah, the prophetess, so we know there's we don't need to resort to mental gymnastics here. She is a prophetess. Who is she? How do we come to know her? What's her prophecy in Tanakh? And what about it is still relevant for today? That requires a little bit more explanation. So, background story. The king at the time of Chuldah was named Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu was the son of Menashe. Menashe was the notorious Rasha Sha'in Kamohu. He introduced all kinds of abominations into the Beit HaMikdash, defiled the Beit HaMikdash, brought in Avodah Zarah of all different kinds. The Gemara says the streets ran with blood in the time of Menashe, and even though he is said to have done tshuva at the end of his life, the damage was done, and Menashe is known as like the absolute worst of Malchei Yehuda, brought Malchut Yehuda absolutely to its knees. And his son was named Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu was a throwback. And the Pasuk says about Yoshiyahu, he did everything that was good, like David, his ancestor. So he became king when he was 8 years old, still very impressionable, and apparently fell under good influences. And 10 years later, after becoming king at the age of 8, so at the age of 18, he instituted a Bedek Habayit, a major cleanup and restoration of the Beit HaMikdash. Again, the Beit HaMikdash had been completely defiled in the time of Menashe. All kinds of horrific Avodah Zarah in the most degrading forms were introduced into the Beit HaMikdash and not cleared out. They had remained there all this time. So in his 10th year, at the age of 18, Yoshiyahu commissioned, he called the Kohen HaGadol, and he instituted a complete cleanup and restoration. Let's get the Beit HaMikdash renovated back to its proper place. And during the Bedek HaBayit, as they were clearing out, we're told that in Pasuk Chet, which is the first Pasuk that I brought for you in source number 2, Vayomer Chilkiyahu HaKohen HaGadol al Shafan HaSofer. So Chilkiyahu, who's the Kohen HaGadol, calls in Shafan HaSofer, he's the scribe of the king, and he says to him, Sefer HaTorah matzati beveit Hashem. I found the Sefer Torah in the Beit HaMikdash. Why the Sefer Torah? I found the, as if it's the one. the Sefer Torah in the house of Hashem. And Chilkiah gave the Sefer Torah to Shaphan, the one that he had found, and Shaphan looked it over, he read it, and he immediately brought it to the king. And Shaphan says to the king, first he tells him all the things that are going on with the Bedek HaBayit. We took out the money, we paid the workers, and we found a Sefer Torah. So it seems, the Mefarshim say, there's some kind of hesitation on the part of Shaphan to get to this Sefer HaTorah. You would think that this is the most exciting news, right? We found the Sefer Torah, like something Kodesh in the house of Hashem, in this house that has been completely filled with Avodah Zarah. Why didn't he start with that news? That's must have been so exciting. But he didn't. He held off. First he tells him about the mundane details. We counted out the money, we paid the workers, and we found a Sefer Torah. Vayhi kishmoa hamelech, and Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vayhi kishmoa hamelech et divrei Sefer HaTorah, vayikra et begadav. And Shaphan starts reading out from the Sefer Torah to the king. And when the king heard the words of the Sefer Torah, he started to cry and he tore his clothing. What's going on? Why? So we'll try to answer both questions. Sefer HaTorah, the Sefer Torah, and why did the king cry and tear his clothing? So the first suggestion for why the Sefer Torah is, Radak quotes that it's brought in the Midrash, that in the time of the kings preceding Yoshiyahu, there had been so much Avodah Zarah and such a determined campaign against teaching Torah that many Sifrei Torah were burned. Almost all the Sifrei Torah in the country were burned, and this is the one remaining Sefer Torah. Abarbanel argues that that's highly unlikely, that there must have been some people who held on to Sifrei Torah, and Yoshiyahu's grandfather, it's true that Menashe was the most evil king imaginable in Malchut Yehudah, but nevertheless, his father, Chizkiyahu, was known as a great tzaddik, and he had instituted a huge campaign to teach Torah, to the point that there were armed guards posted at Batei Midrash, and if you didn't come in and learn, they went after you. So Torah study was so widespread during the time of Chizkiyahu, it's unimaginable that even Menashe could have completely erased every trace of the efforts of Chizkiyahu. So therefore, he says, that's not the answer. Sefer HaTorah, the Sefer Torah, because it was the one that had been written by Moshe Rabbeinu. This was the Sefer Torah. You can look at the Abarbanel, source number 3. Haya inyano masha pershu chazal ba Yerushalmi. He cites a Gemara Yerushalmi to prove this. She Sefer HaTorah asher asa Moshe. This was the Sefer Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu himself had written before his death and was kept in the Beit HaMikdash. And the Gemara in the Yerushalmi describes how during the tenure of Menashe, when he was so determined to wipe out every trace of Torah, this Sefer had been hidden in the Beit HaMikdash, and only when they conducted this extensive cleanup at the behest of Yoshiyahu, its hiding place was uncovered, and they found the Sefer Torah. Now, what caused Yoshiyahu to cry? In general, this Sefer Torah, the Abarbanel is much longer, I just brought a tiny clip of it. So this Sefer Torah that Moshe had written, in general, l'tchilato hu niglal. It was always kept rolled so that when you opened it, it opens at Breshit. That's how they kept it. Nevertheless, when they found the Sefer Torah under Yoshiyahu, bapasuk yolech Hashem otcha v'gomer ve'et malkecha ve'ota sha'a mitzauhu niglal. They found it rolled to the pasuk in the Tochacha, in Sefer Devarim. The Tochacha meaning the parasha of rebuke in Parashat Kitavo, where the Torah lists all the punishments that will befall the nation if they don't keep the word of Hashem. And the Sefer Torah opened to those psukim, and at the top of the page was the pasuk, Hashem will send you out to Galut, you and your king. And at that, Yoshiyahu began to cry, and he tore his clothing. Lefichach charad hamelech me'od, the king became terrified. Shechashav shehaya zeh kenes, V'shehu siman me'et Hashem lema sheyeh. He assumed this is miraculous. The Sefer Torah was always kept rolled to Breshit, and just now, at this moment, when things have been going, he knows what preceded him, and he knows that the people have been sinning, and every abomination that was listed in the Torah not to commit has been committed. Therefore, when he opened up and he saw the pasuk, Hashem will send you and your king out to exile, he said, this is a sign. This is what's going to happen. V'lachein shalach lidrosh banvi'im. Therefore, he said, let's send to one of the prophets to find out. Ve'amar ki gdola chamat Hashem asher nitzta banu v'gomer. Clearly, Hashem is very, very angry with us. Shera'azot me'oto hasiman hamatmiya. He saw this from this terrifying sign that the Sefer Torah was open specifically to this section. Lo ba'avur, and he says not because the Torah had been forgotten or the Torah had been, other Sefer Torah, this was the only Sefer Torah remaining. That's not what caused him this tremendous charada, because we have a promise that the Torah will never be forgotten from Am Yisrael. No matter how bad things get, right? Torah will never be forgotten from among Am Yisrael. So there must be something bigger going on here, and the Abarbanel says this is what was going on. He became terrified by this, which he saw as a sign, and he said, we have to send to the prophets to know how to respond. What should we do? How can we avert this impending catastrophe? So he tells them, Vayitzav HaMelech et Chilkiah HaKohen, back to the Pasuk Yudbet, the king commanded Chilkiah HaKohen and Achikam ben Shaphan. Achikam ben Shaphan is someone known to us. He is the father of Gedaliah ben Achikam, who was appointed governor, you may remember, by Nebuchadnezzar. After Babel destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, they appointed Gedaliah. We fast over his death on Tzom Gedaliah. So this is his father. And his father is also known to us from Sefer Yirmiyahu, because when the people wanted to kill Yirmiyahu, Achikam ben Shaphan was the one who saved Yirmiyahu. So he's a good guy, Achikam ben Shaphan. Ve'et Achbor ben Michaihu, ve'et Shaphan HaSofer, ve'et Asaya, Eved HaMelech, Lemor, the others are not as well known. And he tells them, he sends, L'chu dirshu et Hashem ba'adi uva'ad ha'am, uva'ad kol Yehuda. Go seek out Hashem from a Navi, for my sake, the sake of the nation, the sake of the entire Malchut Yehuda. Al divrei HaSefer HaNimtzah hazeh. Basically, we have to understand what's written here. Ki gdola chamat Hashem asher hi nitzta banu. That's the pasuk that the Abarbanel had quoted. Hashem is very, very angry with us. Clearly, asher lo shamanu, asher lo shamu avotenu, because we didn't listen to him. Al divrei HaSefer hazeh. We didn't listen to the words of what's written in the Sefer Torah. La'asot k'chol ha'katuv aleinu, to do as we were commanded. Vayelech Chilkiyahu HaKohen, and here's the pasuk quoted by the Gemara. Vayelech Chilkiyahu HaKohen v'Achikam v'Achbor v'Shaphan v'Asaya el Chuldah HaNeviah. Where did they go? They went specifically to Chuldah. Eshet Shalom ben Tikva ben Charchas. She is the wife of Shalom ben Tikva. Now, if the pasuk is telling us all this information about her husband, it has to be relevant somehow. What's the relevance of mentioning her husband, who is Shalom, and we get his full name, Shalom ben Tikva ben Charchas, Shomer HaBgadim, he holds an important position. Shomer HaBgadim, the Mefarshim translate alternatively as either he's in charge of the Bigdei Kehuna. There was an office, sort of a locker room, if you put it colloquially, in the Beit HaMikdash. There was a room where the Bigdei Kehuna were kept, and the Kohanim would come there to change into their Bigdei Kehuna. Anything that became dirty had to be disposed of appropriately, and it was a very, very significant position. Or he was Shomer Bigdei HaMalchut, which was also an important position. So he's somebody important in the hierarchy of Am Yisrael at that time. And we're told further, V'hi Yoshevet b'Yerushalayim. Chuldah lived in Yerushalayim b'Mishneh, which is a strange term, which we're going to have to explore further. Vayidabru elaha, they went to Chuldah and they spoke to her and they told her everything that had happened. So let's look a little bit at who is Chuldah. We're going to look at her, the identifying features that are given here, try to understand why are there so many details about her husband, that why are we learning about his importance in the context of they went to seek her, and see how that relates to her nevuah. Okay, so let's start with the Midrash in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Source number 4. Rabbi Azariah Omer, Teida lecha koach hatzdaka. You should know the power of tzedakah. Bo ure'eh min Shalom ben Tikva. Where do we see this from? From the story of Shalom ben Tikva. That's Chuldah's husband. Shehaya migdolei hador. He was one of the greatest people of his generation. V'haya oset stakot b'chol yom vayom. And he did a lot of charitable acts every single day. Ma haya oset. Specifically, what did he do? Haya memaleat hachemat mayim. He used to fill canteens with water. V'haya yoshev al petach ha'ir. And he would sit at the entrance to the city of Yerushalayim. V'chol mi shehaya ba min haderech haya mashkeh. U'meshivet nafsho alav. Now, it was a hot road to Yerushalayim. We know Yerushalayim has we're talking about within the walls of the old city. So he would sit at the gates of the old city. There's no water source in the old city. They're coming from a hot, dusty road of travel to Yerushalayim, and there's no water in the city. So this was a tremendous act of tzedakah that Shalom ben Tikva did. He offered people, he would fill up canteens with water and sit at the gate and offer water to people as they arrived in Yerushalayim. And v'haya mishivet nafsho alav. This would like restore them. They restore their spirits. They were, feeling really wiped out. This was tremendous tzedakah. Ubizchut hatzdaka she'asa, and in the merit of this act of charity, sharta ruach hakodesh al ishto. Now, here it gets straight. Yeah, right? What would we expect? Ruach hakodesh rested upon his wife in the merit of this act of charity. What do you mean? Why not rest it upon him? So there are two approaches to this that I saw that were interesting. One is that the power of tzedakah, and sort of within the context of this, recognize the power of tzedakah, that the power of the act of tzedakah that he exercised was so great that such an abundance of prophecy came down to rest, that it rested not only upon him, but upon his wife and his whole family as well. So he's a prophet, and we'll see later, his son is a prophet, and his wife is a prophet because of him. There's so much shefa from this one act of tzedakah. And we know tzedakah tatil mimavet, the power of tzedakah is very, very great. That's one approach. The second approach is that Hashem saw the need for a female prophetess specifically at this time. That in this generation, they needed a woman. Why did they need a woman? We'll wait a few minutes and explore, but that's the second approach, was that, yes, maybe he merited, it's in his merit, the Ruach HaKodesh is attributed to him, but there was a need for specifically a woman, therefore his act of tzedakah resulted in Ruach HaKodesh resting upon his wife. And we know this by Yelech Chilkiyahu, and quote the Pasuk again, that Chuldah was a Neviah, and that the Midrash derives this from the fact that in the context of her being called a Nevi'ah, she is identified as Eshet Shalom ben Tikva. So that's why she's called his wife in the context of her being a prophetess, because her being a prophetess was in his merit. Okay, skip a few words to the next line. Ucheshemet ba'ala, when her husband died, chasru tzidkot ba'ala. When he died, obviously it's sometimes, most often we don't appreciate people until after they're gone. So the chisaron, the absence of his tzedakah, was felt very profoundly. V'yatz'u kol Yisrael ligmol chesadim Shalom ben Tikva. And when he was taken from the world, masses of people came out to escort him to his final resting place. Now, it wasn't a simple burial. We are told in Perek Yud Gimel of Malachim Bet that at the time of Elisha's death, Elisha was the Navi who followed Eliyahu. He was Eliyahu's student. When Elisha died, Vayamot Elisha vayikberuhu, he died and was buried. Ugdudei Moab yavo va'aretz bashana. And that year, following the death of Elisha, obviously, word got out that the protector of Yisrael was no longer alive. So Moab started sending in bands of marauders to raid in Yisrael. And what happened was, Vayihihem kovrim ish, and there was a funeral. It doesn't tell us of who. It just says that there was a large group of people who were burying a man. Vihine ra'u et hagdud, and they saw a band of these raiders coming from Moab. Vayashlichu et ha'ish bekever Elisha. So they went to the nearest grave that was still, relatively fresh, and they just tossed the body into that nearly open grave. Like they quickly dug it out because it was still freshly dug, and they threw the body in there. Vayelech vayiga ha'ish ba'atzmot Elisha, and when the body touched the bones of Elisha, vayichi vayakom al raglav. He came back to life, and he got up and walked away. And Chazal tell us that person was Shalom ben Tikva. That was Chuldah's husband. Okay, so many people had come out to bury him, so the Midrash continues here. Vayetzu kol Yisrael ligmol chesed im Shalom ben Tikva. V'ra'u et hagdud sheba aleihem. And they saw this band of marauders that was approaching them. V'hishlichu et ha'ish bekever Elisha. Halach ha'ish v'naga ba'atzmot Elisha v'chaya. V'achar kach holid Chanamel ben Shalom. He went on to live and to father yet another child, and this was Chanamel ben Shalom. How do we know the name Chanamel ben Shalom? This is the son of Chuldah, okay, the son of Shalom ben Tikva and Chuldah, who's born miraculously after he's brought back to life. He is the cousin of Yirmiyahu. You may remember, so I was thinking we would have read this a few weeks ago as the Haftarah, but it's the Haftarah of Parshat Behar. And this year Behar and Bechukotai were combined, as they often are, so we didn't actually read the Haftarah, but if you're flipping through, you might have noticed. Chanamel ben Shalom, in the days just before the Churban, came to Yirmiyahu and said, I've become impoverished. I can no longer support my family. I need to sell my field. Will you buy my field because you are the Goel? You're the closest relative. You have an obligation to redeem my field so that it doesn't fall into the hands of a stranger. Now, the Bavlim are banging at the walls of Yerushalayim with battering rams. So it's not like the Churban is far away. Yeah, Yirmiyahu has been talking about the Churban for years, but now it's happening. Like the Bavlim are camped outside Yerushalayim, smashing the walls with battering rams. And he's saying, will you buy my field? Okay? Hashem had told Yirmiyahu that Chanamel was going to come, so he understood that he's intended to buy the field. So he buys the field, and then he says to Hashem, what's going on? The Bavlim are smashing down the walls. You've been telling me there's a Churban, and now you're telling me buy the field? And Hashem says, this is a sign that your descendants will return to Yerushalayim, that he will return to Yehudah, everyone will return to their Nachala, and therefore hold on to that deed of sale. Put it away in a kli cheres so that it will last for a very long time. We don't know where it is. Could be somewhere in Ir David, because this took place while Yirmiyahu was in jail. He was being held in jail because the king didn't like the Neviot that he was going out spreading around. So he was held in one of the dungeons and cells in Ir David. You can go see, when you go there today, they can't tell you, this is the cell in which Yirmiyahu was held, but it was like one of the dungeons there are described in Sefer Yirmiyahu, and we have uncovered them, but we have not yet uncovered this particular deed of sale in Anatot, but Yirmiyahu did purchase the land. And this is Chanamel ben Shalom. So file that away, because we're going to come back to that little piece of information. Chanamel ben Shalom is a significant personality, and he was born as a result of the miracle that occurred to his father. Okay, so they came out to honor him and bury him appropriately. Right. That was the intention. What happened was, the husband, right. What happened was that as they were going out to this burial, bechavod, with full honor, with a lot of people, they saw a band of raiders coming from Moab, and they panicked. So that's where then they took the body, and the closest kever that was somewhat accessible, was the kever of Elisha, which was still somewhat freshly dug. It was within the first year. So they opened it up and tossed him in there. And this is, by the way, it's part of the fulfillment of the promise that Eliyahu made to Elisha before he died, that he would have pishnayim, right? Eliyahu had said to Elisha, what can I give you? What do you ask for? And Elisha asked, pishnayim beruchacha Eli. I want double your powers, right? So the Gemara says that this is where he had double, because Eliyahu revived one person and Elisha revived two. One while he was still alive, the child, who turned out to be Habakkuk, and the other was after his death, that Shalom ben Tikva was revived just by coming in contact with his body. So
you said that the king threw him into a jail, so this was a different king. This wasn't.
That's Chanamel, that his son. So the son of Shalom ben Tikva, came to Yirmiyahu in jail and asked him to buy his field. So the same family, and again, I just want to file away that there is this prophecy associated with Chanamel ben Shalom. It's a prophecy of Yirmiyahu, but it's triggered by Chanamel about the return to Yerushalayim.
So the son is Hananiel ben Shalom.
Chanamel. Chet nun mem, aleph lamed. Chanamel ben Shalom. Fascinating personality. Wait, we're not done with him. We're going to come. I don't know. I like after this.
Hananiel ben Shalom.
Got to tell my children name a child Chanamel because, yeah, we don't use the name, but good stuff. Okay, so if we turn the page now, turn over to the second side. Source number 5.
And he's the one who sold the property to Yirmiyahu.
Yes, he sold his property to Yirmiyahu. Okay, Yirmiyahu. So going back to the idea that the
Was Chanamel also a child of
Chuldah.
Chuldah?
Yes, very significant. Hold on to that. Okay. Yirmiyahu, the Gemara tells us, Yirmiyahu haya, sorry, this is the Psikta, the Midrash. Yirmiyahu haya echad mishlosha nevi'im shenitnab'u be'oto hador. Yirmiyahu was one of 3 prophets who prophesied at the same time. There are often more than one prophet at a time, but 3 is always significant. Yirmiyahu haya mitnabe bashvakim, tzfanya betoch batei knesiot, veChuldah etzel hanashim. So why did we need a female prophetess specifically at this time? The Midrash suggests that each of the 3 prophets who were alive at that time had a specific role. Yirmiyahu would announce his prophecies out in the marketplaces for the masses. Tzfanya was a little bit more, on a maybe more narrow, had a more narrow audience. Those people who actually went into the Batei Knesiot at that time, which was a much smaller segment of the population than Yirmiyahu was reaching. And Chuldah prophesied to the women specifically. So perhaps there was a need for that. And certainly, there is, this sort of brings to mind the triumvirate of leadership in the Midbar, right? The generation of the Midbar, where you have 3 leaders, Moshe, Aharon, Miriam, and we're told similarly that Miriam's role was to teach the women Torah. And I think it's very significant that was at the outset of the entrance into the land, and this is in the last generation before the exile from the land. So at the beginning and at the end, you can't say, people at the end couldn't say, well, if only we had the kind of system that we had in the beginning. Well, you have it. You have 3 Nevi'im, same type of leadership, addressing all segments of the population, just like you had in the time of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Yeah.
Since the women were mostly at home, they didn't even go to the market, I think. Where did she meet them?
Excellent. Next, you're taking us into the next source. Well, a little bit ahead. I'm going to hold off for just a little bit, but in source number 7, we're going to address where was she teaching the women, right? She's not walking through the marketplace like Yirmiyahu, so where is she? We're going to go back now to the Gemara that we started with, the Gemara of there were 7 Neviot. Who are they? How do we know they're Neviot? And the Gemara continues. I didn't bring the whole continuation there because we needed all this background first. The Gemara says, number 6, brings a question on Yoshiyahu. Why, and it sort of intensifies the question that we asked already. We asked, why did Yoshiyahu send to Chuldah of all the Nevi'im? And it becomes intensified. If we see that Yirmiyahu is alive at the same time, you would think he's going to send to Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu is like the Gadol Hador, right? Some people never even heard of Chuldah. Yirmiyahu, everybody's heard of. So who is, why, if you can send to Yirmiyahu, why send to Chuldah? That's the question of the Gemara. Amrei be Rav, Mishmei de Rav, Chuldah krovat Yirmiyahu haita, v'lo hava makpid aleha. So the first thing the Gemara says is, don't worry, Yirmiyahu wasn't offended. He's her cousin, he doesn't mind. Like he's not makpid on his kavod when it comes to, okay, so you went to Chuldah, okay, she's also good, So if you're worried about how Yirmiyahu was going to take it, don't worry about that. But it doesn't really answer the question. So then the Gemara says, Yoshiyahu gufe, but the question's really about Yoshiyahu, not about Yirmiyahu, right? Not was Yirmiyahu offended, but why did Yoshiyahu make that choice? So if we ask the question about Yoshiyahu, Hechi Shavik Yirmiyahu Mishadar L'Gaba, why would he abandon Yirmiyahu and send to Chuldah? Amrei Debei Rabbi Shela, Mipnei Shehanashim Rachmaniyotein. So famous answer. Women are more merciful than men. Merciful. Rachmaniot. Women have more rachmanut than men. So therefore, I don't want to send to Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu is already gaining a reputation as the prophet of doom. So I have here a text that indicates that doom awaits, and I need an interpretation. I need somewhere to go with it. I don't want to send to Yirmiyahu because that's clearly not going to be good. So let's send to Chuldah. Now hold that thought. We're going to come back to it. Rabbi Yochanan suggests an alternative answer, very practical answer. Yirmiyahu lo havahatam. He wasn't there because he went lahachzir aseret hashvatim. He had gone off in the direction of Assyria to try to bring back the 10 tribes who had been exiled there and merged into those populations. And then the Gemara gets into a sort of a tangential discussion of whether or not he succeeded, and he certainly did succeed. We know for sure from the text that he succeeded in bringing back at least some of the population, because later on we're going to see, well, we won't see, but later on in the story, Yoshiyahu makes a big Pesach celebration after the Beit HaMikdash is fully cleaned and refurbished, and there's discussion of people coming from the Aseret HaShvatim, of some of the tribes coming from the north. So we know that Yirmiyahu did succeed in bringing back at least some of them. There are suggestions that he brought back all, but that's highly unlikely. Okay, so skip a little bit in the Gemara. There's an ellipsis, it's a few 3 dots, and then it says Amar Rav Nachman. Lo ya'an, and the Gemara goes back to the discussion of Chuldah, tells us a little bit more about Chuldah. The first thing the Gemara says there is not so complimentary. The Gemara says, Lo ya'a yehiruta lenashe. Arrogance is not becoming to women, and there are 2 women who are arrogant. One is Devorah, as we learned when Devorah said until that there were marauders in Israel, ad shakamti Devorah, ad shakamti ein b'Yisrael, right? Until I arose and put a stop to all the problems in Israel. And of course, we discussed there that it's only the appearance of arrogance, it's not actually arrogance. And the other, the Gemara says, is Chuldah. Why is she accused of arrogance? Because when she's about to give her nivuah, which we haven't even gotten up to yet, she says in Pasuk Tedvav, Vatomer alehem ko amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael, imru la'ish asher shalach etchem elai. Go back and tell the man who sent you. And she doesn't say lamelech. So she calls Yirmiyahu la'ish, like to put him in Yoshiyahu. She's like putting him in his place. He's only human. He's only mortal. Go back and tell that mere mortal what Hashem has said. And because she calls him Ha'ish, and again, there's a kavanah behind it. It's not actually arrogance. It's an appearance of arrogance. Nevertheless, the Gemara says, we see that it's not becoming to women. How do we know that Gemara uses the Aramaic translation of their names, but basically a bee and a chuldah is a weasel. It's a kind of, it's not an attractive animal. It's not an animal you would want hanging around your house. Although the Gemara says that they do hang around houses and we try to get rid of them. So from the fact that both women are named for animals that we don't want hanging around our houses, like when we see bees, we set up traps. We want to get rid of them. So the reason they were called by those names is because they had this unattractive quality of arrogance. A mole, yeah. It's like related to the rat family. It's right, a mole rat. It's a very unattractive, unwanted kind of animal. Okay, but again, these women are being judged kechut haseara. It's really the appearance of arrogance, not arrogance itself. The Gemara then goes on to say, and we don't really have time to get into this very deeply, that there were 8 Nevi'im who were also Kohanim, who were descended from Rachav Hazona. Rachav, who hid the spies who came to check out Yericho, and lists them Neria, Baruch, Sraya, Machsaya, Yirmiyah, Chilkiah, Chanamel, Veshalom. So if these are all, you see at the end they're all connected to Chuldah. And Rabbi Yehuda says Chuldah was also descended from Rachav. How do we know this? Because Shalom ben Tikva, she hung out the Tikvat Chut Hashani. There's the Gzeira Shava. It says the same thing in 2 places. There's a reference to the same idea, the idea of Tikva, of hope. Shalom was the son of Tikva. He's the son of hope. And Rachav put out the tikvat chut hashani. She put out the red thread, which was the symbol that she and her family would be saved at the time of the destruction of Yericho. And the Gemara goes on to say that ultimately Rachav converted and married Yehoshua. And Yehoshua did not have, while he did not have male descendants, he did have daughters with Rachav, and from them descended all of this chain of Nevi'im and the Nevi'ah Chuldah. So she is descended from, again, there's this link between the generation of those who enter the land and are now about to leave the land, right? Chuldah is the descendant of Chuldah, Yoshiyahu, Chanamel, all these people who are involved in the prophecies of the exile are all descended from the people who brought OUisrael into Eretz Yisrael. There's a clear chain, like you have violated the conditions that the entry was predicated on, and I know this because I'm descended from the same people who brought you in, and we ourselves are witness, and now you're precipitating the exile by your behavior. V'hi yoshevet b'Yerushalayim b'mishneh. So we said she lived in Yerushalayim b'mishneh, and we left that term untranslated. And Rashi, on the pasuk, says b'mishneh means b'veit ulpana. Beit ulpana is not, today we use the word ulpana, it means like a girls' high school. At that time, it just means Aramaic. Beit ulpana is a beit midrash. It's a place of learning, a place of Torah learning. So that's the Aramaic translation. Rashi quotes it and says basically that's what the word means. That b'mishneh, she sat in a beit ulpana, in a specific beit midrash, and she taught, and that's, it was known that's where you could find her. And then he goes on to explain exactly where this was located. Sha'ar yesh ba'azara, sheshmo sha'ar Chuldah, b'masechet midot. The Mishnah in Masechet Midot references a gate to Yerushalayim called Sha'ar Chuldah. So if you look at the picture that you have there, you see the big arrow. The arrow is pointing to Wilson's Arch, all the way on the left of the picture. Okay, that's Wilson's Arch, so that is an entrance. Above Wilson's Arch is an entrance for Kohanim who walked directly up to the Beit HaMikdash. If you slide your finger to the right, that's the Kotel, down below. And then if you keep going and turn directions, then you get to the southern wall. And on the southern wall, you see two sets of gates. Those are called by the Mishnah Sha'arei Chuldah, the gates of Chuldah. You could still see today, if you go to the southern wall today, you can see them. They're filled in, they're not open, and they're blocked up. Those are still called Sha'arei Chuldah. Now, those gates date to the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, so it's not specifically in those gates that Chuldah sat. Masechet Midot is a recording of the teachings of the Chachamim who were kind of recording for posterity their memories of the Beit HaMikdash. So they're remembering that Sha'arei Chuldah, that's where the nation, when they came for Aliyah LaRegel, that's where people entered and exited, and they went in through the gate on the right and out through the gate on the left. So there wasn't a lot of bumping into each other. The only exception was if somebody was in Avelut or somebody had suffered a personal calamity, then they went in the opposite direction, and people would know that to wish them, nechama, that something had happened because they were going the wrong direction. That's a tangent. Okay. So there was this sha'ar in Masechet Midot, v'yesh shepotrim, and there are those who explain, based on the fact that this sha'ar existed in the second Beit HaMikdash, that it was called Sha'arei Chuldah retroactively, because that was the place where Chuldah had sat. Not specifically, again, in that physical structure, because that physical structure only went up at the time of Bayit Sheni, but it basically was recreating a place that must have stood there at the time of Bayit Rishon, and that's where she sat. In the sha'ar, you know from archaeological excavations that a sha'ar didn't mean just a doorway. A sha'ar meant like the sha'ar ha'ir, that's where the Zakanim sat. There were rooms within the sha'arim were very, very deep, and there were rooms that were hewn into the rock. So there was a room on the side of the sha'ar, and where people came in and out, and that's where she sat and met with the women, in this bamishneh. So it's called bamishneh because it's like secondary to the wall. It's between the walls. Another suggestion is Mishneh having to do with Torah Sheba'al Peh, that she taught Torah Sheba'al Peh, and Rashi even suggests that she taught the Ziknei Hador. She didn't just teach the women; she taught everyone, and she was able to teach the Ziknei Hador. That's she was really something. But I want to talk a little bit more about the wool because it's fascinating. We don't have that much time left, but I want a few more ideas. The Midrash in Shir Hashirim Rabbah tells us on the pasuk Hinei ze omeid achar kotlinu. Hashem, the Shechina remains behind the walls. Achar kotel hamaravi shel Beit Hamikdash. One reference, one that the pasuk is making is that the Shechina remains at the site of the kotel. That's the source for the fact that the Shechina never leaves the site of the kotel hamaravi. Lama shenishbah lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu she'ino charev la'olam. That's based on a different midrash that Hashem promised that that wall would never be destroyed. Ve sha'ar hakohen ve sha'ar chuldah lo charvu le'olam ad sheyichad shem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are two other gates, traces of which will never be destroyed. Sha'ar hakohen. So there's discussion which sha'ar hakohen is it talking about? Is it talking about the gate that was above Wilson's Arch? Is it talking about the gate that's above Robinson's Arch? There are various gates through which the Kohanim entered up above the walls. Could be either one of those. But Sha'ar Chuldah, the Shechina will never depart from Sha'ar Chuldah, and that the gates will never be. You can fill them in, but you can still see them. Ad sheyichad shem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, until HaKadosh Baruch Hu will renew the use of those gates. So Chuldah, again, why Chuldah? We're seeing all these associations with the eternity of Yerushalayim, that there are these eternal traces of Chuldah and Yerushalayim. And I'll take it even one step further. The Tosefta in Masechet Bava Batra says, Kol HaKvarot mitpanim. All the graves inside the city of Yerushalayim were opened and the bodies removed. This is at the time, again, of Bayit Sheni, when Yerushalayim expanded. And we know that we don't put a cemetery inside the city. The cemetery is kept to the outskirts of the city. So as the city expanded, they moved bodies outside of Yerushalayim, outside of the new borders, except for there were some bodies, chutz mi kever hamelech u mi kever hanavi. Rabbi Akiva Omer, af kever hamelech mi kever hanavi mitpanin. Rabbi Akiva said even those should have been emptied. Source number 9, sorry. Amrulo v'halo kever Beit David v'kever Chuldah hanvi'ah hayu b'Yerushalayim v'lo naga bahen adam me'olam. Two exceptions to this rule of kvarim can't be in Yerushalayim. Malchut, the kvarim of kings descended from David HaMelech, particularly David. Here it specifies David HaMelech himself, kever David himself, kever Chuldah. Kever Chuldah remains in Yerushalayim. And then there's a technical reason given that the tunnels were dug below them to allow the tumah to escape. But kavod was given to David HaMelech and Chuldah. And all other Kurim, the bodies were exhumed and removed outside the city. Fascinating. What is it about Chuldah that ties her so deeply to the eternity of Yerushalayim that her kever was left undisturbed? One more fascinating midrash before we get to some explanation. Going back to Chanamel, and I'm telling you, you're going to want to use this name in your family after you hear this midrash. It's extraordinary. At the hour when Yerushalayim was destroyed, this is a midrash on Eicha, the wall of Yerushalayim was breached, and the Bavlim entered Yerushalayim, source number 10. Me'asa Chanamel dod Yirmiyahu. What did Chanamel do? He's the cousin of Yirmiyahu, the same cousin who sold the field. Hishbia malachei hasharet b'shem, v'horidem mizuyanim b'chlei zayin al ha'umot. He summoned an army of angels, armed angels, by using the Shem Hashem. He knew how to say the Shem HaMeforash, and he summoned an army of armed angels to fight against the Bavlim who were breaking down the walls of Yerushalayim. Kivan shera'u hakaztim kain. When the Chaldeans, the Bavlim, saw this, barchu mipnei eimatan. They started running away because they were petrified. The sight of armed angels coming at you can only imagine. Ad sheshina lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu et shmotam. So what happened? Hashem saw what was happening, obviously, and he changed the names of these malachim. What does that mean? When the name of a malach, we know this from the malach was wrestling with Yaakov. He's like, I can't tell you my name because my name changes based on my mission. So Hashem changed the names of the malachim, which means that he reassigned them. They're no longer on this mission. They were recalled. So Hashem calls them back up to Shemayim. V'he'elam larakia. He brought them back up to the Shamayim. Ubikesh Chanamel lahoridan v'lo yachol. And Chanamel tried to bring them back, but he couldn't. Like that was, he exhausted that avenue. Because Hashem changed their names. Me'asa, so what does he do now? Hishbia et sar ha'olam b'shem. There's a malach who's appointed over the entire world, and he summoned him using the Shem HaMeforash, the name of Hashem. V'higbia et Yerushalayim utla'a ba'avir. And he lifted Yerushalayim, and the city was suspended in midair, so the Babylon couldn't reach it. Ad sheba'at, and then there are two different nuschaot of the Midrash, until HaKadosh Baruch Hu kicked either the malach or the city. Sheba'at bo or ba HaKadosh Baruch Hu min hashamayim v'nafla. And Yerushalayim fell back to the ground and was defeated by the Babylon. This is unbelievable Midrash, right? You have Chanamel, who is the son of a man who was miraculously brought back to life, born after that, right? He is a living testimony to the truth, to our belief in Tchiyat HaMeitim, and he single-handedly holds off the Churban, right, by tapping into this intense spiritual power that he clearly inherited from his parents, right? His father, the tzaddik, who gave tremendous tzedakah and was revived from the dead, his mother, the Neviot, and he himself, who was affected by this immense shefa, abundance of Ruach HaKodesh that was brought into the world by his father's behavior, and single-handedly holds off the Churban for a while, to the point that, what is the meaning of this idea that Yerushalayim is suspended in midair? Did that physically happen? So the fate of Yerushalayim hung in the balance. And ultimately, he couldn't, his merit was enough to bring it to that point, but he couldn't hold off the Churban entirely. When you weigh the one, Chanamel ben Shalom, this one tzaddik against the entire nation and all the crimes they had committed, unfortunately, Yerushalayim was destroyed. But the fact that he reached the point of even being able to hold it off for whatever few minutes it was is an unbelievable thing. So we left one loose thread, which was the question of Nashim Rachmaniotein. And the Maharsha, among many other Mefarshim on the Gemara, says, Nashim Rachmaniotein. So Yoshiyahu chose to send a message to Chuldah rather than to Yirmiyahu because he thought he'd get a better answer? Anybody have an issue with that? What's the problem with that? A Navi can't change their nevuah, right? If the verdict is whatever it is, it doesn't change based on who the messenger is, right? The verdict is what the verdict is. So we're going to explore two ways that that's understood, but Bruchasha Kivant, that's the kivun of the answer, is the delivery is different. So the first answer that's brought by the Maharsha in source number 11 is he first asks the question, and at the end he says, Diyesh l'tareis derachmaniotein utvakesh alehem rachamim l'shanot mera'a l'tova. Women, because of her mercy, maybe she would daven that the gzeirah should be overturned. That the gzeirah exists, there's no question. She has to say it. But maybe she'll say it, she'll deliver the verdict, but then she'll turn to Hashem and she'll daven. So it sounds like a great answer, and it's very possible that it's true also. Yirmiyahu, though, also davened. There are times when Yirmiyahu receives a very harsh nevuah, and he does what he has to do, and he gives the nevuah, but then he turns to Hashem and he cries. And he davens, heart-rending tefillot on behalf of the people, asking, is there no other solution? Is there no other way? And so it's not an absolute final answer. It's a good answer. Maybe in terms of Yoshiyahu's expectations, he thought, again, Yirmiyahu is the prophet of doom already, so maybe we'll get a better outcome with Chuldah. Mishpitzot Zahav gives a very Hasidic answer, which is brought down in the Sefer Be'er Moshe in the name of the Maggid Mezerich, and he says that the nevuah doesn't change. Ki be'emet Hanavi lo haya mishaneh chas v'shalom v'hadiburim sheshama mipi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? The Navi can't change the words that he hears from Hashem. He can't change the substance of the prophecy. What can he do? Al hadavar haya talui b'nigun hanavi. Everything depended on the nigun. How was the nevuah delivered? How was it sung. You could sing something in a very, was it like a harsh beat? Or was it sung like a lullaby? Like, it's going to be bad, but there's a soothing tone to the way it's delivered. This is, by the way, one of the biggest dangers in texting, and people who are, dating coaches deal with this issue a lot, is that when in texting, the kids today communicate by texting. To them, saying, I spoke to so-and-so really means I sent a written message to so-and-so. Doesn't mean I spoke to them. And they don't even understand that there's a difference. So you come to a couple who's dating and they start texting, and I think it happens with I would imagine it happens in every single relationship. I don't know, I can only speak to the ones that I've seen. But there's some misunderstanding that's based on the fact that you don't hear the tone in which something is said. And the tone can change the meaning. That's what he says here. The tone can change the impact of what you're hearing. So they went to Chuldah thinking she would say it softly. She would say it gently. She would somehow cushion the blow. Even, it seems clear that there is a blow to be delivered, but she'll somehow soften it. And if they went to Yirmiyahu, it was going to be harsh. That's the way it is. So we find, what did she prophesy? We go back to the psukim, in the Nevuah, it's psukim tetvav through chaf, the end of the parak there, which, again, they went to Chuldah, they spoke to her, they told her they found the Sefer Torah, and she said, tell the man who sent you. Number one, the first two psukim, she says, regarding the nation, regarding the mikdash, there's no hope. Ko amar Hashem, hineni mevi ra'a el hamakom hazeh ve'al yoshvav. Et kol divrei hasefer asher kara melech Yehuda, just as was written back in source number 2, psukim tet zayin and yud zayin, because they left me, they worshipped foreign gods. And why did they worship foreign gods under Menashe? L'man hachisuni, they did it lahachis. They did it knowingly. It wasn't, they were tempted and they thought maybe it would help. They did it lahachis, they knew it was wrong and they did it anyway. The Gzeirah regarding the Beit HaMikdash has been completely sealed after Menashe. There is no hope that you can save this place from Churban. There's a second part of the Nevuah. Ve'el melech Yehuda sholeach etchem, this time she calls him Melech Yehuda, to the king who sent you, tell him he will receive a reprieve. Because I see that he genuinely, he cried, he tore his clothing, he was genuinely distraught by this prophecy that he intuited. He will not be, the Churban will not happen in his time. You will die in peace. And you will not see what will happen to this place. It's not much of a nechama. Yoshiyahu, right? He says, okay, there will be a Churban, but you won't live to see it. So did that comfort Yoshiyahu, Melech Yehuda? His whole concern is for the nation and the people. And moreover, all of the Mefarshim jump on this pasuk, V'ne'esafta el kibrotecha b'shalom. You will die, you'll be brought to your kever in peace. Yoshiyahu was killed in battle. He did not die peacefully. So some answer by saying he was brought to kvura b'shalom, and that was nes, that was a miracle, because generally if a king is killed in battle, he suffers, even the body suffers terrible indignities at the hands of the invading army. So it's a miracle that he was brought to kvura Yisrael b'shalom. That's how they resolve it. But Rav Eliyahu Yedid, who has a sefer called Sheva Neviot, has a very, I think, novel explanation and very, very beautiful explanation. And he bases it on the teachings of the Midrash, which I'm going to just summarize the remaining sources because we really have to finish up. The Midrash teaches that Yoshiyahu, following the Nevuah of Chuldah, following the news that he heard from Chuldah, still he understood that, okay, the Churban is inevitable. But nevertheless, we still have to do tshuva, and he instituted a huge tshuva movement. And says Rav Yedid, he also intuited that he had to act for the future of Yerushalayim. How can you act for the future of something that's about to be destroyed? Yes. So he says, he understood from her words, "Velo tir'u einecha, velo tir'ena einecha." Your eyes should not see. Okay, I'm summarizing the last few sources. The Chuldah had said, "Velo tir'ena einecha." Your eyes will not see. So he intuited that there should be something unseen to contribute to the future of Yerushalayim. What was it? There was a Mesorah that Shlomo HaMelech, when he built the Beit HaMikdash, had dug a cavern underneath the site of the Aron HaKodesh, and Yoshiyahu gave orders that the Aron should be hidden underneath, in this hidden chamber, underneath the Evan, which sat underneath the Aron in the Kodesh HaKodashim. And the Aron was buried. No one can find it, despite attempts, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark. There was that movie of Indiana Jones trying to find the Aron HaKodesh. They did not have the Aron in the second Beit HaMikdash. The Aron was missing at the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. But the Gemara, the Talmud Yerushalmi says that Yoshiyahu said to them, Beruach HaKodesh, if we do not hide the Aron and protect it, if it is taken out with you to exile to Babel, it'll never come back. The implication being that if we do hide it, ultimately it will come back. And that, says Rav Yedid, that's the connection between Chuldah and Chanamel and Shalom ben Tikva, is that hope for the ultimate restoration of the Beit HaMikdash, the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, and the reinstitution of the Aron in its proper place. Yoshiyahu took steps to ensure that under the direction of Chuldah. And that's why she is so connected with the eternity of Yerushalayim. She's given that kavod, that her kever remains untouched in Yerushalayim, because she gives us constant hope throughout all the years of exile. Just as she remains in Yerushalayim, the Aron remains in Yerushalayim, and will be restored with the coming of Mashiach. B'mheira b'yameinu.
We don't know where the
Kever Chuldah is located, there is a site on Har HaZeitim called Kever Chuldah. It was recently somewhat restored. I would definitely not recommend going there without armed escort and people who know where they're going and what they're doing. But there is a site that is identified as Kever Chuldah on Har HaZeitim.
that we accept.